This is Susan C. Anthony speaking, and I welcome you to my workshop, Spelling for Success. The purpose of this session is to share with you ideas that helped me get past the spelling roadblock so that I could concentrate on other things without constantly feeling distracted, distressed, and discouraged by my students' terrible spelling. Before we begin, I should tell you a little about me so you know who's talking. The photo above was taken years ago, not long after I learned how to effectively teach spelling. I have more wrinkles now and I need glasses to read, but the method of teaching spelling I'm going to share with you today has worked with hundreds of kids since that photo was taken. I moved from Colorado to Anchorage, Alaska in 1979 and was hired to teach 6th grade. I was amazed at how hard the words were in the spelling textbook, and even more amazed that after passing a weekly test, the kids would misspell the very same words the following week in their writing, as well as a whole lot of much simpler words. Unless a spelling program is bringing about improvement where it counts in kids' writing, it's not working very well. Early in my career, I enrolled in a month-long summer institute on the writing process. It was emphasized how important it is to have kids do a lot of writing without worrying too much about the spelling. But I have to admit, the spelling was driving me crazy, and I was uncomfortable that the more kids wrote, the more they were practicing errors. I had to address the issue of spelling so I could sleep at night. In 1984, I made it a goal to figure out the most efficient way to teach spelling. Efficient means achieving maximum results with minimum wasted effort or expense. They say, for example, that if you exercise for 20 minutes 3 times a week, you'll get maximum benefit from each minute of exercise. More exercise is good, of course, but with 20 minutes 3 times a week, you'll get the best results for the least effort. It took me a while, but I've found something that works, and that's what I'll be sharing with you in this workshop. When I was teaching, I attended lots of classes where many good ideas were shared, but because there were no ready-to-use materials and I didn't have time to make the materials myself, the ideas were never used. Just so you know, you don't need to buy anything to use the ideas I'll be sharing. Everything you need to know to teach spelling will be in this talk and in the handout. The books are intended to save you time if you like this approach, so you don't have to do all the preparation work yourself. Spelling Plus, pictured here, is the basic book, the teacher's manual if you like. I wrote a dictation book because not everybody was using dictation when the only book available was Spelling Plus, and dictation is really important. In fact, if you do nothing after listening to this talk but add dictation to what you're already doing, you'll likely have a better spelling program. The dictation book here has sentences to follow every list in Spelling Plus, as well as a lot of resources to help you teach lots of other language objectives using dictation. For the upper levels, there are sentences available on my website from the Bible and from children's literature. I wrote a worksheet for each common set of homophones in this book. We call these homonyms when I was a kid, but homophones, which means same sound, is the correct term. The workbook for use with Spelling Plus has all the reproducible lists from Spelling Plus already reproduced and then bound into a student workbook. I did this to make life easier for homeschoolers. Classroom teachers would do better to just run off the list from Spelling Plus as you need them. The Personal Dictionary is a little book with a page for each letter where you can write words kids use in their writing but don't yet know how to spell. The Personal Dictionary also has reference pages with the 1,000-word list, challenge words, spelling rules and guidelines, and so on. Spell Well is a 1-year program for older students based on the 388 words most often used and misspelled by high school students. This book is consumable or reproducible, and dictation sentences are included. I looked and looked for a handwriting book that simply gave kids practice correctly forming letters and didn't include a lot of other stuff that wasted time. I finally made my own. There's also a book for manuscript handwriting. In this hour or so, I hope to convince you that spelling is important. You're probably already convinced of that, or you wouldn't be listening right now. I hope to clarify why spelling in English is inconsistent and difficult to learn. I'll talk some about the history of the English language, which is fascinating, And it might be a way to hook some of your older bad spellers into being interested in spelling. If kids know tidbits about why words are spelled the way they're spelled, it can help them remember the correct spelling as well as spur their interest in language and spelling. I plan to share specific, effective procedures that can lead to greatly improved first draft spelling. This is the nuts and bolts section of the presentation, the answer to the obvious question about what to do about the problem. And I hope to increase your confidence as a teacher of spelling. Regardless of how well your kids learn, if you know you're doing the best job you can of teaching, you'll have more confidence and you'll rest easier. I have to admit that when I started using this program with 6th graders, I did not see immediate results. I stuck with it because I knew it was better than what I'd been doing before, and I didn't have any better ideas. In time, though, I noticed objective improvement. With younger kids, results come a lot sooner. They haven't been practicing their errors for quite so long. A handout for this workshop is available as a PDF download on my website, susancanthony.com. Everything you need to teach the program is in the free handout. You don't need books. The books are to save you preparation time and make your life easier. I went to lots of classes myself, but didn't have time to prepare the materials. I didn't want to do that to you. The first page of the handout has a list of signs of a successful speller, the steps to mastery of a spelling word, the creative critical bridge, which we'll talk about in this session, and directives for the daily practice activity and daily dictation, which I'll be showing you. Page 2 has a list of the most useful spelling rules and guidelines, as well as mnemonics, or memory aids for some difficult words. For example, to remember how to spell tomorrow, spell the 3 small words Tom or row. Together is to get her, and so on. The 3rd and 4th pages in the handout are the Spelling Plus lists, the 1,000 most often used and misspelled words, organized into 11 lists of 15 words each per level. Again, you'll hear more about the list later. So, why is spelling important? The most important reason is that, like it or not, English-speaking people are very judgmental about spelling. Thankfully, they're a lot less judgmental about perfection in speaking. And that's one of the reasons English is a popular language to learn in foreign countries. It probably goes back to Middle England, where only rich kids had the means to go to school or to become literate. Their parents and teachers shamed them into memorizing long lists of spelling words to prove they weren't part of the despised lower class, the hoi polloi. Based on spelling, judgments are made about a writer's intelligence and character, about the teacher, about homeschooling in general, about the state of education in the United States, and about the future of the world itself. Misspelling a word in a job application can keep you from getting a job that has nothing at all to do with spelling. It's not right, but it is the way it is. An analogy I use is appearance versus character. It's better to marry someone with good character than with good looks, but that doesn't mean we neglect our appearance. We all know that when it comes to writing, content is more important than spelling. But that doesn't mean we can neglect spelling. We're not supposed to judge books by their cover, but the fact is that we do. Good spelling facilitates clear communication. Readers are distracted by poor spelling and may miss the main message. When kids' spelling is good in first draft writing, they can concentrate on revising, as distinct from editing. Revising means working to improve the communication of the message. Editing means fixing technical mistakes. Good spelling means there is less need for recopying and rewriting, and those things put a drag on the creative process. Some years ago, the junior high school in Middletown, California, north of San Francisco, was vandalized and their new computer lab was destroyed. The 8th graders wrote letters to the editor, and the editor chose to run them unedited. This was picked up by a wire service and reprinted all over the country. Notice the judgments you make as you read these. You don't want people making judgments like that about your kids or about you as their teacher. Please do not let anything like this leave your school or home en route to a critical audience. You can edit kids' work until they learn how to do it for themselves. Tell your kids that sending something out before it is ready is like going to a concert or a special event in dirty clothes. It's disrespectful. Sometimes spelling counts more than it does at other times. In their private journals, it's not that important, but when you're writing to communicate with others, it's important. One sign of a successful speller is acceptance of personal responsibility for making sure your own final drafts are excellent. For bad spellers, that can mean asking a better speller to edit for them. This is just part of a long email I received from a woman in Bosnia that again illustrates the judgments people make about bad spelling. She wrote, "I've always thought that native English speakers must be perfect at spelling, grammar, etc., because it's their own language and they should be better at it than foreigners. When I started using the internet and chatting to Americans and other native English speakers, I noticed that even the best of them made a lot of mistakes. They misspell the most common words, and most of them don't know the difference between two and two. Even here in Bosnia, when you're applying for a job, they expect you to be good at spoken and written English, but native speakers don't even seem to care about spelling." Well, this email went on and on for pages. She was astounded to learn that her spelling and grammar were better than most Americans she encountered online. Here's a humorous true illustration I just have to share for the sake of levity. The movie Take the Money and Run is enjoying a revival in Israel these days, but not in theaters, in banks. In the movie, Woody Allen passes a note to a teller, but the teller can't read his handwriting. Arguments erupt over the spelling and syntax. Bank managers and customers join in, and the robbery attempt just melts away. In Israel, this actually happened twice, as tellers struggled to decipher atrocious handwriting, misspellings, and slipshod grammar. The robbers, like Allen, slinked away as dismal failures. Back to appearance versus character. This person may be blissfully unaware that he has food in his teeth, but it would be hard for others to ignore. I'm ashamed to admit this happened to me once. I was scheduled to meet some important people one evening, and the salad I ordered before catching the bus took such a long time to arrive that I had to race out the door in order not to miss the bus. I arrived at the meeting, smiling brightly at everyone. Someone I thought was a friend was with me, but said nothing. I didn't realize until I went to brush my teeth that evening that anything was amiss, and I felt horrible. I decided my so-called friend wasn't much of a friend. Tell your kids that you are their friend. You care about them, and you will gently tell them when their zipper is down, when there's stuff in their teeth, or when they've misspelled a word in a final draft, so that other people won't think bad things about them. When they make harsh judgments about other people, use the opportunity to teach them that others can be just as judgmental toward them, and that they might not even know it. People make judgments before knowing the whole story. It's not right, but that's the way it is. Obviously, Americans care about appearance. American women buy an average of 1,484 tubes of lipstick, 2,055 jars of skincare products, and 1,324 eyeliners, eyeshadows, and mascaras every minute. In fact, we care sometimes a little too much about appearance, I think, but that doesn't mean that we should neglect it. We should care about our appearance and do the best we can with what we have, and we should care about our spelling in the same way. Now let's take a short spelling test. You can't have a spelling class without a spelling test, of course. So number your paper from 1 to 18 and just do your best. This won't be graded, obviously. Number 1 is fade. Her jeans were starting to fade. Fade. Number 2 is braid. Here, let me braid your hair. Braid. Number 3 is played. The dog played with his new toy. Number 4 is freight. There were 100 cars on the freight train. Number 5 is great. You're doing a great job. Great. And by the way, did you feel just a little bit good when I said that, even though it's just a sentence in a spelling test? Not just kids, but grown-ups need affirmation. In fact, most people need to hear about 9 good things for every bad thing in order to be able to take the bad thing as constructive criticism rather than as discouraging criticism. That's a lot, but it's okay to tell your kids the same good thing again and again and again and again, as long as it's true. Notice their good character qualities, their attitude, effort, and improvement. Focus on and water what you want to grow. If you focus on the negative, that's what tends to grow, and you don't want that. Okay, back to spelling test. Number 6, go. It's time to go. Number 7, though. We don't want to go, though. Number 8 is blow. The wind is starting to blow. Blow. Number 9 is sew. She is learning to sew. Number 10 is cherry. I want a cherry on my ice cream. Cherry. Number 11 is very. It was a very nice picture. Very. Number 12 is hairy. Our dog has a lot of hair. He is so hairy. Hairy. Number 13 is berry. And you might say this word differently. You might say bury. But the dog went to bury his bone in the snow. Bury. Number 14 is scary. That's a scary thought. Scary. And number 15 is marry. They plan to marry in June. Marry. Now, obviously, the point of this exercise is to show you that identical sounds can be spelled in many different ways in English. English spelling is inconsistent and therefore difficult. That's not the case with other languages, such as Spanish, German, or even French. If you can speak some languages, you can spell them. There are no spelling classes in some countries. The final 3 words aren't words, so I won't give a sentence. Just listen and spell them how you think they would be spelled. Number 16 is flate. Flate. Number 17 is sari. Sari. And number 18 is vrow. Vrow. Okay, keep in mind there is no correct spelling for numbers 16 through 18. Did you spell flate, number 16, F-L-A-T-E? In a large group, a majority always spells it that way because it's the most common spelling for that sound. The next most common spelling is F-L-A-I-T. But something like F-L-E-A-T, as in great, would not be a good way to choose to spell it. The word great is irregularly spelled. In Old English, it was pronounced greet, as in beat, B-E-A-T. The pronunciation changed over time, but the spelling didn't. The other 2 words, sari and vrow, are spelled many different ways in any large group of people because there's no best guess in their case. English spelling is inconsistent because sounds are spelled more than one way, as the spelling test showed. I always used to wonder why kids would spell played, P-L-A-I-D. This helped me understand. They need to know that played is a root word plus a suffix. English was first transcribed using the Latin language, which had fewer letters than English had sounds. Initially, they used Viking runes for the extra sounds, but those had pagan associations and were eventually dropped. Then they used letter combinations, such as SH, CH, and TH, as well as doubled up with some of the other letters. This is one reason there's not a nice one-to-one letter-sound correlation in English. Another problem is that letters spell more than one sound. Notice the EA in the words break, pair, heart, and treat. This presents more of a problem in reading than in spelling. Some sounds have dropped out of the English language over time, but their spellings remain in common words. For example, the GH was once a guttural sound, like a voiced H. That sound still exists in German and other languages. In English, we spell it, but we don't say it the old way. The infamous schwa sound is ubiquitous in English and can be spelled every imaginable way. That's the sound that we use in almost any unaccented syllable. I remember being 20 years old in Spain, talking to some young men who had studied English in school and were practicing it. One had an interesting question. What does gonna mean? He had learned to say going to. We say gonna with the schwa sound. Spelling rules have many exceptions. With a few exceptions, I prefer to call them guidelines. People sometimes ask if mine is a rule-based program, and it's not. Although I teach rules and guidelines, the program is based on the 1,000-word list rather than on a set of rules. As I mentioned before, it's much easier to spell in languages such as Spanish or French, but it's much harder to write languages like Chinese. We don't have the best of all possible languages, but we don't have the worst either. The history of the English language gives some clues as to why spelling in English is inconsistent and difficult. I'm sharing this with you because if you have upper elementary, junior high, or high school students who can't spell, this can be a back door to capture their interest. First of all, our spellings reflect the way English was pronounced 400 to 500 years ago. Vowels in particular are pronounced much differently than they were way back then. But the recognized spellings for common words did not change along with the pronunciations. The core of English is Anglo-Saxon, which is a Germanic language. The Anglo-Saxons conquered Britain in about 450 AD. 30% of English words, including almost all the most common words, have a Germanic heritage. Anglo-Saxons pronounced the KN. The word know, K-N-O-W, was pronounced Kanawan. Alaska natives also pronounce the KN, so Knik arm is pronounced Knik, not Nick. You can tell where somebody's from when they pronounce that here in Alaska. St. Augustine brought Catholicism to the British Isles in 597, along with the Latin language. He retained old spellings from the Greek, such as PH and RH. Those spellings were changed to match pronunciation in other languages like Spanish, but not in English. The Vikings invaded Great Britain in the 790s AD. Their language was very similar to Anglo-Saxon, or English. The Viking word for a short garment was skirt. The Anglo-Saxon word was shirt. The words took on different meanings to describe different short garments. Think of the words speak and speech. One is a verb and the other is a noun. This is the reason for the strange spelling of the word ache. At one time, the verb was ache, spelled A-K-E, and the noun was H, spelled and pronounced A-C-H-E. Over time, the same spelling with the opposite pronunciation came to serve as both the verb and the noun. The Normans, French speakers, conquered England in 1066 and subjugated the English-speaking people. The English for farm animals included the words cow, calf, and pig. The rulers, who lived in castles and ate the fruits of the land provided by others, called the animals beef, veal, and pork. Now those words have separate meanings. About 40% of English vocabulary comes from French. If you've ever studied a foreign language, you've probably heard of grammatical gender. In Spanish, for example, mesa, meaning table, is a feminine noun. To speak Spanish properly, you have to know the genders of the nouns, because that affects every adjective and pronoun in the sentence. German has 3 grammatical genders, masculine, feminine, and neutral. English no longer has any, thank goodness. It was dropped during the Black Death, bubonic plague in the mid-1300s, when between 30 and 60% of Europeans died, including a lot of the teachers that would have tried to keep the kids' speech the same as it had been. You might remember the musical My Fair Lady. In it, Henry Higgins could tell by a person's pronunciation exactly where they came from in Great Britain. There were hundreds of English dialects in the Middle Ages, and there are still quite a few. In some cases, the pronunciation from one area of the country combined with the spelling from another area to contribute to the inconsistency of English spelling. For example, the word Bury, B-U-R-Y, which was on your test. The spelling is Kentish, and the pronunciation is West English. The word one, O-N-E, was originally pronounced own, as in loan or only, but a deviant pronunciation became the universal pronunciation, and aspiring spellers today are left with the sad results. In the Middle Ages, these were all acceptable spellings for the word cliff and its plural cliffs. Notice the en for plurals. This survives in only a few plurals, such as oxen, children, and brethren. It is now a very rare way to pluralize. Creative spelling was once considered a mark of genius. Literate people, including kings and queens, prided themselves on never spelling a word the same way twice. All of Shakespeare's surviving signatures are spelled differently. I sometimes tell my challenged spellers that it's a pity they weren't born a few centuries earlier, when creative spelling was considered a mark of genius instead of a mark of ignorance. Neither is altogether true. Some of the most brilliant people in history were bad spellers. Some people are gifted with visual memory. My niece once told me she just snaps a picture of a word with her mind and then visualizes and copies it letter for letter. She's an excellent speller. Not all people have that innate ability. They can learn to spell correctly, but it's a challenge. Written words were once considered sacrosanct. It was traditional to copy them letter for letter, no matter how oral pronunciations had changed. And another reason for our inconsistent spellings was based on the fact that in the very highest quality handwritten manuscripts, the monks carefully spaced letters so that both the right and the left margins were straight, what we would call justified. Early printers also wanted straight margins on both sides. To get them, they would double letters, add or remove final E's, whatever it took. Here's an example. I'll let you read this yourself and then read it to you as best I can. Notice the inconsistencies in spelling and how close they sometimes are to each other. Your ability to decipher this might depend to some degree on how many student papers you read. Let me read it to you as close as I can figure it. So it was no boat to steer. I believe that's what they mean there. But he departed and rode westerly, and there he sought for 7 or 8 days. Anybody pick up on those are Roman numerals for 7 or 8? Notice the J as the final I there. I and J were once interchangeable. And at last he came to a nunnery, and then was Queen Guinevere aware of Sir Launcelot as he walked in the cloister. And when she saw him there, she swooned thrice, that all the ladies and gentlewomen had work enough to hold the queen up. Notice the U and the V are interchangeable. So when she might speak, she called ladies and gentlewomen to her, and said, You marvel, fair ladies, why I make this fair. Truly, she said, it is for the sight of yonder knight that yonder standeth. Wherefore, I pray you all, call him to me. When Sir Launcelot was brought to her, then she said to all the ladies, Through this man and me hath all this war been wrought, and the death of the most noble knights of the world. For through our love that we have loved together is my most noble lord slain. This obviously is literature, and it has lasted for hundreds of years. And it also shows that the spelling is not what defines a good piece of literature. You know, one of the things that really makes me chuckle about this is that she swooned thrice. We just don't do this today anymore, ladies. And I always wonder, how she could swoon thrice? Does she fall down, then get back up, then fall down again and again? Anyway, things were different back then. Some of the swooning was caused by how tightly they put the corsets on. A little more history. In the 1600s, it became fashionable to change spellings to reflect their Latin origin. The word det, which was spelled D-E-T-T-E and would have eventually dropped the last T-E, became D-E-B-T, reflecting its Latin root, debitum. Rhyme, spelled R-I-M-E in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, was changed to rhyme, R-H-Y-M-E, to reflect its Greek origin. Samuel Johnson published the first English dictionary in 1755. Remember the slide with acceptable spellings of cliff and cliffs? Well, it would have been prohibitively expensive to list each word under all its various spellings, so Dr. Johnson had to choose. Unfortunately, in some cases, he chose the more difficult spelling. For example, he chose soap, S-O-A-P, instead of soap, S-O-P-E, which was also an acceptable spelling at the time. When Noah Webster published the first American dictionary in 1828, he changed some traditional English spellings to distinguish America from England. The English spell center, C-E-N-T-R-E, for example. In America, the proper spelling is C-E-N-T-E-R. Webster wrote the first American spelling book, and though he himself later worked toward spelling reform, people so revered his speller that he met with only limited success. Every effort toward spelling reform in English has failed. One of the last attempts was by the Chicago Tribune to change just a few spellings. They ran into so much resistance from the public that they finally gave up. The final headline read, "Through is through, and so is though." The word in red at the bottom isn't a real English word. It was created to illustrate the inconsistency of English. You pronounce the GH as in the word rough. So remember that sound, GH as in rough. The O is pronounced as it is in women, women, and the TI is pronounced as it is in nation. So GH is in rough, O as in women, and TI as in nation. Fish. George Bernard Shaw thought that one up. I thought it was kind of fun. When I was learning all this, I found an interesting headline in the Anchorage Daily News. Tokyo's disordered addresses do a number on nerves. Our spelling system developed in much the same way as Tokyo's address system. Here's something from the article there. Michiko Kuroso lives on a street with no name, just off another street with no name, in a neighborhood where her house and 5 others are all number 33, and another 10 are all number 22. Kuroso's neighborhood is typical of Japan's chaotic address scheme, handed down through centuries and modified by 1960s urban planners. Few streets have names, and most places are described by a landmark. In many areas, houses are numbered not consecutively, but in the order in which they were built. Where several houses were built on property once owned by a single landlord, they all have the same number. So there is a rationale behind Tokyo's addresses, but it's based more on history than on reason. Our spelling system is much the same. So how do people learn to spell? According to Sandra Wild, a PhD and professor of childhood education and an authority on spelling, learning to spell should ultimately be as natural, unconscious, effortless, and pleasant as learning to speak. My jaw dropped when I read that. In a perfect world, maybe, but in the real world, everyone learns to speak, naturally. Speech seems to be hardwired into the human species. But lots of people never learn to read. Literacy, including spelling, has to be taught. It's not natural, and it's not always easy. Another authority, Mari Applegate, wrote something I found a lot more useful. Society charges teachers with the task of bringing students to the point where their use of language does not handicap them. Not every child will learn to speak, spell, or write equally well, no matter how well they're taught. Your job as teacher is to be sure they know enough not to be handicapped by their use of language. Not every line of work requires people to spell well. Some brilliant people are poor spellers. They hire secretaries. Some kids will never become great spellers, but you want them to become adequate spellers. For your handicapped spellers especially, that should be your goal. In my experience, there are several problems with spelling textbooks. There's little or no transfer to student writing. The word lists often confused kids rather than clarified things for them. Many of the exercises were a huge waste of time that didn't have very much to do with spelling. And there were too many different sets of directions. The kids spent all their time figuring out the directions rather than learning to spell. Here's an example of a word list that confused a young relative of mine. I imagine this list was titled something like Ways to Spell the Long O Sound. Clearly, this child learned there are a number of ways to spell that sound, but sorting out which word took which spelling was beyond her at that point. I wondered, could this be part of the problem? Spelling texts weren't working, but the writing process had its shortcomings too. Kids didn't catch their own errors. Their mistakes looked correct to them. The more they wrote, the more they practiced misspelling. There were so many misspellings in their first draft writing that editing and recopying took a huge amount of time. Worst of all, I had to admit I cared about spelling. I had to do something to make it better. When I saw this cartoon, I laughed. I guess things could be worse. Though all kids won't become great spellers, they can all become successful spellers. Here are the signs of a successful speller. The handout has this list. This is what you need to aim for. A successful speller accepts responsibility personally for correct spelling in his or her own writing. He's mastered the most common and useful words and rules, has a systematic and adequate method for approaching the study of new words, can independently use the dictionary and other memory aids, recognizes regular versus irregular spellings such as state and great, and understands word construction, roots, prefixes, and suffixes to help with words like made, braid, and played. The method I settled on for teaching spelling is consistent with this list. Not all research concurs, but the best research I found seems to indicate that it works to teach high-frequency words, to use spelling lists for instruction. Overpronunciation is helpful, self-correction is important, and use word, sentence, word testing, like I did in our little spelling test. Remember that not all research concurs partly because research can be ideologically driven, where people only pay attention to the results that match what they want to find. The word list is considered by some educators to be a 4-letter word, but research shows that spelling lists are helpful when kids are learning. As far as overpronunciation, this helps a lot. For example, the word people. I tell kids to think P-O-pull, to say in their minds all of the letters, and then spell based on that. The word chocolate, for example, chocolate. That's an example of overpronunciation. I was amazed to learn that 90% of English texts consists of just 1,000 base words. Just 1.5% of words used by students in grades 9 to 12 accounts for 28 misspellings in one study, 28% of the misspellings. And just 6% of words used, these are 388 words, accounted for 51% of high school students' misspelling. In English, knowing a small group of words can take you a long way. Here are the first 25 words on the list of the most common English base words. A few of these words are frequently misspelled, including they, with, and from. And here are the first 27 words on a list of words most frequently used and misspelled in high school student writing. This list of 388 words was the basis of my first program for 6th grade students, which has since morphed into Spell Well, a one-year review for older students. I used this list with 6th graders, and it's appropriate for anyone in junior high school or even college. One mom who applied for a job as a secretary came in to tell me that these were the exact words her prospective employers used to test her for the job. My book, Spell Well, is based on those 388 words most often used and misspelled by high school students. When I moved from teaching 6th grade to 5th grade and then 4th grade, it was clear that I needed more age-appropriate lists. In a perfect world, I would read thousands of students' papers from all levels and develop a core list based on the common misspellings. But it's not a perfect world. So what I did was compile all high-frequency word lists I could find. And I took notes of frequent misspellings by my own students and then organized the highest priority words into lists of 15. There's nothing sacred about 15 words per list. The goal is to master the 1,000 words on the big list, the main list. This is a method for teaching spelling more than a curriculum, and the list is not organized by spelling rules, as I said before. Once I had compiled a list of 1,000 core words, I organized it according to commonalities and patterns. Each list after kindergarten consists of 165 words in 11 lists of each level. This is 11 lists of 15 words each. I have to tell you, though, that the choice of 15 words is for convenience, so I didn't have to make my book longer and take more paper and charge more money. There's nothing special about it. One mom who pulled her 4th grade daughter out of public school to homeschool her did so because her daughter's spelling was so atrocious, and the teacher didn't think it was that important. She started teaching spelling with lists of just 5 words, and before long, her daughter was asking for more. As the teacher, knowing your own students' needs, adjust the length of the lists as needed to fit. Remember, the goal is mastery, meaning kids learn to spell these 1,000 words correctly anywhere, anytime in their first draft writing. The spelling program is more of a method than a curriculum, as I said, and I already mentioned that it's not based on rules. You've probably heard about the difference between the left hemisphere of the brain and the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere controls the right half of the body. It's the part of the brain that deals with facts and order, sequence, and nitty-gritty details. The right brain, by contrast, controls the left side of the body. It deals more with creativity and holistic thinking and is less bound by time. This paragraph, which I read in a text during a speed reading class, helped me reorganize my language arts program. Creative thinking leads to the birth of new ideas, while critical thinking tests ideas for flaws and defects. Both are necessary, yet they are incompatible. Creative thinking interferes with critical thinking and vice versa. To think more creatively, we must let our thoughts run free. The more spontaneous the process, the more ideas will be born. A steady stream of ideas furnishes the raw material, then critical judgment selects and refines the best ideas. Though we must engage in the two types of thinking separately, we need both. Look at that last sentence. Though we must engage in the two types of thinking separately, we need both. One thing that struck me about this was that creative thinking interferes with critical thinking and vice versa. When kids are writing, they should be thinking creatively. Spelling is a critical or a left brain skill. As adults who've mastered writing, it's a one-step process. It's all one process. We don't separate it into creative and critical. When we revise, we also edit. We switch from one side of the brain to the other without even realizing it. Creative writing involves the writing process, brainstorming, rough drafts, sharing, revising, and so on. The focus should remain on ideas. I have a different workshop on creative writing that I'd recommend you watch, the writing process. Spelling, capitalization, punctuation, and grammar are the nitty-gritty left brain things. The focus on the critical side is form rather than ideas. If you separate those two functions in your mind and in your instruction, you can help kids eventually work them back together. If spelling, capitalization, punctuation, and so on are to transfer into kids' writing, you have to build a bridge from one to the other and back. Eventually, the goal is that children will master and use both sides of their brain while doing it, without one interfering with the other. The bridge is built by teaching kids to edit their creative writing and using dictation after spelling, as well as collecting personal words from their creative writing to feed back into kids' spelling lists. Kids don't normally master spellings after just a week of practice. Here are the 5 steps to mastery. Number 1, correct on a weekly test. Most kids can do well on this if they have enough practice after a list is introduced. Number 2, correct on a mixed review test. Any words kids have supposedly learned can be brought back up in any test thereafter. You don't want kids to think that after they've passed a test, they can delete that information from their mind and make room for more. Number 3 is correct in dictation. Dictation spreads and mixes spellings and language mechanics over time until they show up correctly in first draft writing. It keeps the review going. Number 4 is correct in a final draft, where a child can see and fix their own mistakes. Some kids never get this without the gift of a visual memory. Number 5 is correct in first draft writing. The word is mastered, or second nature. There's no need to consciously think about how it's spelled. The spelling comes automatically while the writer is thinking about the ideas he's trying to communicate. In the end, I used just 3 basic techniques for teaching spelling: daily practice, homework, and daily dictation. The word daily is key. Every day, a little at a time, day after day after day. In a way, your kids are training their minds, thinking about something, then not thinking about it again, not thinking about it again, recalling it to memory, and using it, forgetting it, relearning it. All are part of the process of learning to spell. The daily practice activity takes place on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday when there's a new list. If you're just starting with this program, especially if you have older children, I recommend first testing the kids, starting with the Spelling Plus Level B, and compiling your own list of 5 review words. Then use that list to teach kids and yourself how to do the daily practice activity. I recommend between 5 and 20 words per list, but the number of words is up to you. I was amazed to learn that it takes between 35 and 75 practices to learn something new, like a spelling word. If an incorrect spelling has been practiced 35 to 75 times, it can take 2,000 practices to unlearn the wrong spelling and relearn the correct spelling. I compare it to slashing through thick brush. The first time you go through, you find a route. When you retrace that route again and again, it becomes easier to travel. If you take a machete and hack your way through brush, it becomes even easier. And if you travel the route often enough, you widen it to a path, then a road, then a paved road, and finally, hopefully, a Roman road that will be there forever. It becomes easier for you to spell a word correctly than incorrectly once this happens. When I first heard the idea of having kids respond orally in mass, I was shocked. Ask them to talk out loud in class? I spent too much of my time trying to get them to be quiet in class. I have to admit, though, that having kids respond orally got them talking about what they were learning, as well as engaging all their modalities: sight, hearing, saying, and doing. I'll show you how this worked in just a minute. Directives are basically directions, but in this case, they're exactly the same over and over for each word practiced. After a while, kids know what to do and when to do it, even without teacher input. The activity becomes routine, almost sing-song. Once I was in the middle of directing daily practice in a classroom. The principal arrived at the door and drew me out into the hallway to discuss some urgent matter. I went back into the classroom and the kids were still engaged in the activity, without my leadership. They knew what to do by then. My job of directing had moved to the background for them. And blank lines on the Spelling Plus list, people ask about this. They can be used for personal words or mixed review. And you can see there at the bottom of the Spell Well list. On each Spelling Plus list, there are blank spaces after the list. People often ask what to do with them. I used 5 a week for personal words and the other 5 for mixed review. Now this is a Spell Well list here, so there's only 5 at the bottom. The Spelling Plus lists have just 15 words. To prepare for daily practice activity, reproduce the list 4 times, 2 times on the front of a piece of paper and 2 times on the back. The first list will be used on Monday, the second on Tuesday, the third on Wednesday, and the fourth on Thursday. On Friday, they take the weekly test. Some people worry that this will be boring. In my experience, not even the best spellers found it boring. Some of them ended up making their own lists of 20 words of the champions rather than using the weekly list everybody else used. The worst spellers saw objective progress, and that encouraged them. We settled into a routine and just did it. Mastery requires more than a few practices. Even virtuoso pianists practice their scales. It's not because they don't know them. They want them to be second nature. It's to keep themselves sharp. So don't worry that it'll hurt kids to practice a word they already know or think they know. It takes a lot of practice to achieve mastery. So here are the directives in the daily practice activity, using the word complete from spelling list 60. The teacher said our words are in red and the student words are in blue. So look at the first word, read the word, complete. Spell and read, point to each letter. C-O-M-P-L-E-T-E, complete. Trace, spell and read. The child traces, C-O-M-P-L-E-T-E, complete. Cover, write, spell and read. C-O-M-P-L-E-T-E, complete. Check and correct. The child goes back to the original and points to each letter as he says the words. C-O-M-P-L-E-T-E, complete. And then goes to the word they just wrote. C-O-M-P-L-E-T-E, complete. Look at me, spell and say complete. C-O-M-P-L-E-T-E, complete. Now I have an old, not so great video of one child doing the daily practice with that word. Hopefully this will play well and you can see how it goes. Homework simply provides extra practices. Kids need a copy of the weekly list with their personal words spelled correctly on the bottom and a blank sheet of notebook paper. And here's a video of one child doing the homework procedure for the word fascinate. The directives for daily dictation as well as the daily practice activity are on the front page of the handout. Begin dictating sentences the week after kids have passed that word on a weekly spelling test, not the same week you teach it and introduce it. Keep using the word in dictation off and on until it shows up correctly every time it's written, until it is mastered. Here's how dictation goes. The teacher words are in red and the student words in blue. The sentence is, I was referred to the library. Say, I was referred to the library. And the kids say, I was referred to the library. Write, I was referred to the library. And the students write the sentence. What do you need to remember in this sentence? Capital letter, punctuation, anything else you've taught. And then the teacher writes and the students say capital I, WAS was, REFERRED referred, TO2, THE the, LIBRARY library, period. Check it, correct your own sentence. Notice that the child hears the sentence 4 times and says it once before he writes it. Here is a short video of me doing this activity in a classroom. Since this film was made in 1987, I've added a step. I asked them to tell me what they need to remember to write the sentence correctly. They tell me back capital letter, period, or other ending punctuation, any homophone and why they use the one they do, any spelling word with a mnemonic, such as people, opal, any roots with prefixes or suffixes, any words that need to be capitalized and why, any punctuation and why. In short, anything I've taught them. When it's incorporated into a dictation sentence, they are supposed to tell me back before we move on to the checking and correcting. I also stopped making charts ahead of time and just wrote the sentence on the board as I went. That saved preparation time. I don't try to make spelling fun. I try to make it efficient. I tell kids it's like cleaning house or washing dishes. It's not necessarily fun, but it's something we have to do. I'll try to make it as painless and successful as possible for them. It only takes a few minutes a day, and if they cooperate, we can move more quickly on to other subjects that are a lot more interesting. What makes daily dictation powerful is that it is daily. Daily, kids are required to retrieve information they've learned in lessons along the way and apply it, not to their own sentences, but to my sentences, which I'm not so afraid to criticize and grade as I am their sentences. If you correct kids' spelling in their own sentences, to which they often have some emotional attachment, you risk stamping out their desire to express themselves in writing. When kids wrote me notes that said, "You're a nice teacher," Y-O-U-R, I thanked them warmly for the sentiment. When a child wrote, "You're a nice teacher," Y-O-U''R-E, with "your" properly spelled, as a contraction, I got really excited, not only about the sentiment, but about the spelling. I'd almost dance for joy and tell them how few notes like that I receive, that are not only encourage me, but are spelled correctly. I show the principal and other teachers. In other words, I figuratively water the things I want to grow and pass over the others. Daily dictation provides extended and mixed review that goes on until kids really master the words and the concepts. All their senses are involved, as I said before. They see the word, say the word, hear the word, and write the word. Unlike some other daily language programs, they don't see any intentional errors. The only errors they see are their own. I don't want kids to proofread until they're pretty good at writing correctly. Some kids with poor visual memories will never be very good at proofreading. I have to say that I found dictation to be the single most worthwhile and efficient teaching technique ever. I could work so much into it, everything in the reading, language, and spelling texts other than creative writing. I could work in homophones, capitalization, punctuation, paragraphing, letter form, word building, prefixes, suffixes, and so on, and grammar. I compare dictation to a vehicle, say a van. Its purpose is to move things from one place to another. The things themselves can vary. In a van, you might move kids one day, groceries another time, lumbers, plants, or any number of other things. With dictation, you can incorporate spelling, homophones, capitalization, and so on, one little concept at a time, one little step at a time. I wrote a dictation book because not everybody was using dictation. With homeschoolers, though, one thing I do is keep a list in front of me with words and concepts that each child needs to practice. And as they are writing one sentence, I think about the next dictation sentence. In addition to recordings of me teaching the daily practice activity and dictating the tests, I have recordings of me giving the dictation sentences. I did this for families that have kids at many different levels. If you have kids at many different levels, you might write 2 sentences everybody can write, and then a harder sentence for your middle child and a really hard sentence for the older kids who are ready for it. You can teach language concepts such as homophones, capitalization, and punctuation to kids at all levels at the same time. I recommend 4 sentences a day, day after day after day for every child. You will see results, if not immediately, eventually. I also wrote a worksheet for each of the common sets of homophones. I recommend only having kids do the worksheets that they need. It may not occur to them that the words dear and dear, D-E-A-R, and D-E-E-R, sound the same because their mental images are so different. So unless they confuse a set of homophones in their writing, there's no need to point them out. Don't introduce confusion where it doesn't already exist. Pick and choose what you need from this book. If you're homeschooling and well organized, your kids' spelling list can be based on personal words, words they've misspelled in their writing. In a classroom situation, personal words provide for individualization. Don't try to introduce personal words until you're comfortable doing daily practice and dictation. One thing at a time. Remember, you're learning too. You don't want to overload yourself. If your kids are 4th grade and older, the first thing you might want to do is test them on levels A, B, C, and D of Spelling Plus. There are recordings of me giving these tests as well as sentences you can use to test on the website. Stop testing when kids miss quite a few or seem to struggle or become frustrated. Compile words they miss into review lists. The first may be just 5 words long, and gradually teach them, as you're learning yourself, how to do daily practice and dictation. If a child misses a word on a spelling test, that can become a personal word on the next week's spelling test. Remember, it can take up to 2,000 practices to unlearn a mastered misspelling and relearn the correct spelling. So be patient and encourage your kids to be patient. I use the example of a teeter-totter with a bucket of sand on one side. If you place a bucket on the other side, an empty bucket, nothing changes. If you put a spoonful of sand on the high side, nothing seems to change. But if you keep doing that, you'll eventually reach a tipping point. That's what we're going for when the same word shows up on a child's list week after week. It takes time and practice. There's no need to hurry or worry. Just keep on keeping on. For personal words, you should keep a list of words each child uses and misspells in his or her own writing. There's no need to mark their writing papers with errors. Just put the words on a personal list and feed it back into their weekly list. When you respond to kids' writing, respond to the thoughts and expressions more than the spellings. You can use index cards for a personal dictionary or paper punch business cards on a key ring so that you can add in new words in alphabetical order. This personal dictionary I wrote, or you can use any other system you prefer. This personal dictionary has the 1,000 words, challenge words for reference, and a page for each letter on which you, not the child, can write words he or she needs to know for their writing. When he needs to use a word again, he can look it up in the personal dictionary rather than the big dictionary to find the correct spelling. And this becomes a source of personal spelling words. Some people use the glued part of medium-sized Post-it notes in the personal dictionary so that kids can arrange and rearrange the words, as well as remove words once they've been mastered. People often ask how I incorporated all this into a daily schedule. Here's how. In the early part of the year, I always taught kids handwriting, so I knew that they knew how to properly form the letters. Once I knew, they could choose cursive or manuscript. When I got through all the letters, I taught keyboarding. You don't want kids to master the wrong way to type, so it becomes hard for them to unlearn and relearn it properly later on. The daily practice activity with 20 words or 15 on the Spelling Plus list, plus 5 spelling personal words, took about 10 minutes. Before dictation, when it was appropriate, I taught a lesson. It could be one of the homophones worksheets, something from a language text, or something as simple as when you use the word TOO at the end of a sentence, meaning also, you have to put a comma after the word coming before it. Think of sentences that end with the word to, meaning also. He's coming too. They want to play too, etc. Use that in every dictation sentence that day and for a few days. Then in fewer sentences. Every time the kids have to tell you that there's a comma after the word that comes before the word to. Okay, so we have 10 minutes for about handwriting and keyboarding, as long as the kids need those. Then 10 minutes for the daily practice activity, 5 minutes for a lesson, and 10 minutes for dictation. 4 sentences a day. That takes about 10 minutes. I recommend you start with short sentences and gradually work your way up to longer ones. This gradually increases a child's auditory memory and helps kids gain skills they'll need later to take notes. When the sentences are long, I often repeat them softly as the kids are writing them to help them remember. I looked and looked for a handwriting book that simply reinforced correct formation of letters and it didn't bring up a lot of stuff that was wasted. I finally wrote my own. I think kids still need to learn to read and write cursive, even if you have them work a lot with computers. This is one of the pages from the cursive handwriting books. I introduce each letter and show how to write it properly, then write it improperly a few times and see if kids can tell me what I did wrong. They trace, complete, and eventually write the letter several times. I walk around and notice the really good letters they've written, maybe putting a star on the best one, and explaining what I like so much about them, what's so good about them. Remember that the whole point is to just learn how to properly write cursive letters. So that's basically it. I want to finish this session with some comments on how to address spelling in student writing. And this will be kind of a recap. First of all, focus on ideas when reviewing kids' creative writing. Be positive, not critical. Tell the child what is correct as far as their spelling, punctuation, capitalization, etc., especially if you see improvement. If you correct spellings and so on, clarify that for the time being, you are acting as the child's editor and that you want them eventually to be the editor for their own paper. Note mistakes they make to yourself. Make a note of them. You want to include these later on in your lessons and in dictation. Add any misspelled words onto the personal word list or in the personal dictionary. Reteach and review homophones, punctuation, and capitalization. And keep looking for application in writing. When you see that kids have applied something you've taught, celebrate it. Notice it and celebrate it. Be positive. Water and nourish what you want to grow, not what you want to disappear. You want good spellings to grow and bad spellings to disappear, so focus on what they do well. Because you don't want to send anything out for critics to use against you or against your children, feel free to serve as editor until the child learns to do that for himself. You might want, if you have several children, to teach them to edit each other's work as well, so that they can become editors. Though you generally respond to the child's ideas in their writing rather than spelling, be sure to note any mistakes they make and work those things back into their spelling lists, lessons, and dictations. It's a dynamic process. You want to have kids write a lot so you know what they need to learn. Let's practice what you should do when you, as far as dealing with spelling and writing, by reading this lovely story by a young girl and thinking what positive things you could say to encourage her. When I was a baby, my mom took me to the store. I was the kind of child that liked to talk. When my mom was getting something, I looked around. I saw a man with a green hat and brown pants. I decided to follow him and talk. Well, my mom forgot about me and went home. When she was halfway home, she said, "Heather, why are you being so quiet?" Then she said, "Lori, where's Heather?" Lori said, "I don't know, at the store, I guess." My mom almost had a heart attack. She turned around, then went back to the store. She looked everywhere. She finally went to the checkout part. There I was, eating candy. My mom told the story to the people. They about died of laughing. So think of good things you could say about this. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's a funny story that makes you laugh. The writer uses details and dialogue. This story has what is called voice, meaning that you get a good sense of the writer's personality from the way she uses words on paper. She used capital letters and periods on real sentences. What do you need to notice quietly and teach? Obviously, the word when, and other words like way and why. She needs to learn to indent paragraphs. You have a lot to work with here. You can see how her writing would shape your teaching in a dynamic back and forth process. So, my goals at the beginning were to convince you that spelling is important, to clarify why spelling in English is inconsistent and difficult to learn, to share specific, effective procedures that can lead to greatly improved first draft spelling, and most importantly, to increase your confidence as a teacher of spelling. So go on and go for it. Please email to ask any questions or to tell me how this program worked for you. The most important aspects are the daily practice and daily dictation.